Hello everyone, welcome to Series 5 of the GBA Lightbulb Sessions. The Great British Entrepreneur Awards, in association with BT Skills for Tomorrow, have designed a free live stream series of Lightbulb Sessions to support small businesses and entrepreneurs with insightful and advice-driven sessions, featuring some of the UK's brilliant entrepreneurial minds to illuminate your path to entrepreneurial success. You can find out more about BT Skills for Tomorrow by heading to their website at www.bt.com/skills for tomorrow, or by clicking on the link in the comment section. In this session, we sit down with Jonathan Thornton, Head of Corporate and Commercial Team at Russell-Cooke. Today, Jonathan will discuss some of the key elements needed to make your business resilient. There is an opportunity to ask questions during this session. If you have a question you'd like to ask, you can pop this in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer these towards the end of the session. Please note there will be a poll at the end of the session, and all answers for this will be anonymous. And with that, I'll pass over to our host today, Francesca James.
Thank you so much, Chloe, and hi, Jonathan. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Frank.
As mentioned, I'm Fran, the founder of the Great British Entrepreneur Awards and community, and that community element has actually never been more important. So we've designed these sessions to really get to the heart of some topics that are really important to entrepreneurs, and we're absolutely delighted to be joined by yourselves and to be supported by Russell-Cooke. So, Jonathan, could you just start off by telling me a little bit about what you do and a little bit about your role within Russell-Cooke?
Yeah, thanks, Fran. So, as Chloe said, I'm the head of the corporate and commercial team. I've actually been at Russell-Cooke all my working life, which is 35 years now. So, as I tell all my clients, that's for them to decide after I've done some work for them whether they think that's a good thing or not. Our clients are mainly people like the members of GBA, really, private entrepreneurial businesses, some small, some large, some long-standing family-owned businesses, some very young, sort of growing businesses. So that's who my team act for anyway. Russell-Cooke as a whole is a top 100 law firm, and it's got a full-service UK firm, and we aim to act for all private UK businesses and third sector charity businesses and institutions and private individuals. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's us, really.
Fantastic. You've definitely got that down to a T. So the topic of today's session
is very on message.
How to build a resilient business. And so I'm going to start with a big question, which is, I think, probably hard to answer, but we'll dig into the detail as we go along. Is it harder to start a business or to keep one running?
Yeah, I do. You're going to ask that. I'm going to give you an analogy. So I think it depends a little bit on personality. So my wife's very good at starting things, but I'm the one who generally keeps them running. And I think that's because she's got that sort of personality. That I remember years ago in some management training, is it sort of Wellbeing, those management sort of types. And she was very much a sort of shaper, an initiator, a starter of things. And I was the one who, I think with the description, was the sort of completer finisher. So I was the sort of person who sort of got into the nitty gritty and did the detail. So I think it does partly depend. Obviously, that's a bit of a pastiche, but obviously, I think it does partly depend on what your personality is. But I suppose overall, my experience suggests I think it is actually, in truth, much easier to start it than to keep it running. I think the sort of excitement and the energy and the newness and the invigoration that you get from starting and initiating something really carries most, whether you're a computer finisher like me or a shaper like my wife, that sort of carries you through. But then once you've got over that initial hump, then sort of keeping it going, driving it forward, and re-energizing it to sort of kind of go again and keep going again. I suppose my impression is I think that's harder actually, and that's a real challenge. And that, I guess I've seen that with clients over the years. And to say it's easy to start business isn't fair, is it? Of course, it's not easy. It's damn hard work, as most of your, excuse my language, as most of your people will know. But I think, relatively speaking, it's easier to sort of initiate than to run, probably.
Yeah, I absolutely think that's fair. So, I mean, look, resilience. I think resilience is a word that we've probably used certainly a lot in the last couple of years, but it's absolutely part of the of an entrepreneur's sort of dictionary, and often a characteristic that is always given to entrepreneurs. What would you say from your experience of working with several clients, growing businesses, perhaps encountering challenges are some of the most important factors to consider when looking at developing, maintaining, growing a resilient business?
Yeah, I've got sort of what I often say to people on this is I've got sort of 3 Ps, because this is one of those things that we often sort of discuss, and it's sort of planning, people, and then pivoting or pragmatism in another way. That's the same P in a way. And obviously none of this is kind of rocket science in a way, is it? But you've obviously got to plan, but at the same time, I think you can sort of over plan. I remember when I was at school, so there's an old military adage, isn't there, that however good your plans are, they never survive the first contact with the enemy. and obviously a business isn't a battle in that sense, but I think that there's a degree of the same point. You can sort of over plan and then get too sort of locked into your plan, and when reality hits in terms of customers and the market and people and whatever, you have to sort of shift. So you don't want to be too stuck with your plan, but you do need a plan. But planning is partly about options. It's about having rather than a rigid direction that you have to go down. It's about options that you can pick out depending on what hits you and what you see in front of you. So planning, but flexibility and adaptability in planning, I suppose. People, again, obviously a statement of the bleeding obvious, but absolutely, and gosh, we've known that over the last couple of years, haven't we? The right people and nurturing your people, absolutely fundamental to every business, whether it's a business like mine or yours or any of the others. And then I'd say that pivoting or that pragmatism, the sort of recognition that however you sort of envisaged it at the start, whatever your plan was, however wedded perhaps to that plan you've got to deal with the reality as you find it, and that will mean sort of changing your plans. It might mean a very dramatic change to the nature of your business or activity. It might mean a difference to the scale, but being willing to be pragmatic about that. And I suppose that's actually the hardest. That just something that you were very committed to, having to change it. I think a lot of us find that. I'm speaking myself. I find that very difficult.
You mentioned people there. I think that we're talking today about building a resilient business, but at the heart of a resilient business is a resilient founder and is a resilient team, as you sort of alluded to. I guess what I want to maybe have a look at is how impactful is the well-being, not only of the founder, but of the staff when it comes to keeping a business running effectively?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, and we've all learnt that over the last 2 years. If we didn't know it before, and I guess we should have known it before, it's obviously vital, isn't it? I suppose my take on it is like this: that well-being isn't distinct from the business, and we, to a large extent, we all derive our sense of well-being as much from the work we do and the business that we're in as from our sort of extracurricular, use an old-fashioned phrase, lives and out of work things. So providing a supportive and nurturing environment in the business, but also an environment that sort of challenges people a little bit and pushes them to achieve is important. And there's a delicate balance there. You don't want to just chuck people in the deep end and abandon them and then criticize them when they don't succeed. And you need to recognize that we all, move at a different pace, and, some things will work and some things won't. But I think people derive their own sense of well-being to a significant degree from their work and what they do and how well they do it and the sense of well-being that gives them. So I think providing opportunities for people to do that, and as I say, pushing people a little bit to challenge themselves and achieve is important. Not overdoing it, but you'll really enhance people's well-being if you do that well and carefully. But setting example as the founder, setting example in terms of looking after yourself and not overdoing it, but also that provision of opportunity. So, yeah, it's key, isn't it? Absolutely key. Well-being, and we've all learned that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, let's dive into some of the nitty-gritty. And obviously, you mentioned at the beginning of this call that you work with many entrepreneurial businesses, many like the people within our community and are joining us either on Zoom or dialed into the live stream. So what business strategies, have you seen or been aware of that have been tried and tested during the COVID-19 pandemic to keep a business running during a crisis?
Another good question. Well, put it like this. So this isn't quite. I will quite an answer to your question, I suppose. I think what a lot of businesses done, certainly what my business has done, and talking to other business owners, I don't think we're alone in this. I think the sort of crisis response generally from staff in the business has been great. I think we've nearly all found that, when a real crisis hits, people have stepped up, haven't they? People have worked hard and done their best and got stuck in, and they've driven through it. And it hasn't been easy for a lot of them. A lot of people have had very difficult personal circumstances to juggle with their work commitments, but most people have got stuck in. So in a way, the business sort of strategy has partly been set for us by the great response of so many people working in our organisations. I suppose what's contributed to that is good comms. So communicating with people clearly, communicating with people early, and not shirking from some difficult things. I'm going to blow our trumpet a little bit here. We were in on this very early. We were starting to take steps and warning people about the pandemic back in February 2020, which was before it had really started to strike home. And I remember a lot of people, some people in the firm, and I probably might be among them, would think, are we a bit overreacting here? Is this a bit odd? What are we going on about this for? And it turned out we were absolutely right. But communicating early with people, communicating clearly, and acknowledging where there's uncertainty, acknowledging you can't set necessarily a definitive path, but setting the path as far as you can, and then making sure you follow up with some more comms when you need it. So I think generally the crisis response has been good, and generally people in organisations have responded fantastically, is my experience, to the horrendous demands in some cases that have been brought on them. Good comms, I think, in the business is crucial, but I think sort of longer term, I think what a lot of us have done, and perhaps this is where I was saying I'm talking about my own business, perhaps particularly on my own style of business. I think that we've sort of drawn down during the crisis on the sort of body of internal goodwill in the organisation, those sort of relations that we've built up amongst ourselves over the years. We've used that. We've drawn down our goodwill capital, and like any capital, it's a finite resource. You can't sort of keep spending your capital. We all know that as business owners. You could spend it a bit in a crisis if you have to, and you've got no alternative. But having spent your capital, you've got to replenish it. And I think certainly in our case, and I suspect this is the case with a lot of businesses, what we need to focus on now is sort of rebuilding, replenishing, nourishing that goodwill capital that we've drawn down on, because I think a lot of people will be a bit spent out, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you think that might be replenished? What would you be what internally are you looking at? What have you seen clients doing? That'd be interesting to.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what a key thing we think, and I'm aware that there'll be a lot of different views on this, but a key thing is actually getting people back in the office to a degree. I know not everyone agrees with that, but I think, and it depends again very much on the business. But I think getting people in the premises, getting them interacting together, getting them enjoying being part of the organisation, I think that's particularly key for junior and younger people. I think it's been very hard for new staff, for junior staff, for trainee staff to sort of learn during the pandemic, and I think people responsible for sort of training them have found that hard. We've all done our best, and we've all found ways around it. So I think, but I think a key thing is therefore sort of building up the sort of collective culture by being together to a degree. Obviously, we're all going to be more flexible now, and that's absolutely right and healthy. But I do think that that's important. I'm conscious, as I say that might be right for us. Maybe other businesses will have a different take on that whole premises thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'd like to take that opportunity. If there's anybody that has got another take on it, or a question that is related to anything that we're talking about today, please do pop it in the Q&A function. I guess, we've talked about recent events, we've talked about COVID. It's hard not to, we're talking about resilience to really hone in on what's happened the last couple of years. But do you think there needs to be more crisis preparation for businesses after what we've seen the last couple of years? And what might that entail?
In terms of, well, I mean, in one sense, no, not what you expect me to say, but I mean, in the sense that I think we've all, as a result of the pandemic, we've all had a sort of extended 2-year crisis management experience, and we've all got our sort of remote working sort of capabilities up and running and all the rest of it. So in a way, I suspect we're probably all now very well geared. I remember, it was about 5 or 6 years ago here, as a firm's managing partner, we had a gas leak in our building where someone smelt gas anyway. And we had to literally empty the building at no notice at all and send everybody home, like instantaneously. And that was a huge challenge to our sort of crisis disaster recovery plans. And we put better plans in place after that. But if that were to happen now, we're absolutely all geared up for it, because we can all work remotely. So in a funny way, I suspect in terms of crisis response, we're all now well geared up. Inevitably, the next crisis will be of a sort of different sort, won't it, requiring a different response. But I think in a funny way, I suspect most of us are quite well positioned now.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that, like you said, it's important to note that whatever comes over the hill, whether that's, this is a unique challenge that we've all faced collectively together. But there are challenges and obstacles that businesses are going to face on an individual basis. And I want to dive right down into the nitty-gritty, and something that I know that Russell-Cooke specialise and work on. But the next question I've got here is, what are the early warnings of insolvency in a business? And as a founder listening on this call, what should they be? What should they be doing? What should be their first steps?
Yeah, I mean, I was brought up with and this won't be a new phrase to anybody, but I was brought up with the idea that cash is king, because my great grandfather famously was a small builder in the West Midlands between the wars, and in family sort of legend went bust in the 1920s, not because he wasn't profitable, but because he ran out of cash, which is a sort of classic thing, isn't it? So I guess so I was brought up with that idea, and that cash and cash flow is absolutely, cash is king. It was something I learned from a very early age. So I think that's still key. So I guess the vital early warning is to have sort of good sort of cash flow monitoring systems in place in your business, and be able to identify early when you think you're going to hit a cash crunch, and to address it. one of the things we commonly hear is people are very concerned about the fact that they say they're trading while insolvent, and they shouldn't trade while insolvent. And in fact, the law doesn't say you can't trade while insolvent. Many businesses are insolvent, or at least on a balance sheet basis. Their liabilities exceed their assets. What the law says, and there's lots of law around insolvency, but perhaps the sort of key bit for this purpose is that you shouldn't wrongfully trade. So as directors of a business, you shouldn't carry on. My insolvency partner may be listening and will no doubt holding his head in what I'm saying, but you shouldn't carry on trading beyond a point where you know, or you ought to know, that you can't avoid insolvent liquidation. So it's if you think, I suppose, that you might be getting to that point, obviously you need to take appropriate professional advice from an appropriate insolvency specialist, typically in either a specialist insolvency business or an accounting or a law practice, to decide what to do. And it's not, as I said, it's not merely trading while insolvent isn't an issue. It's that ability to see your way out of it. So I've had a recent example of that with a client who was very, very successful. They'd done well in the pandemic, but they were sort of slightly over trading. The business sort of dipped a little bit towards the end of the pandemic, and while they were perfectly profitable in an accounting sense, they were heading to a horrible sort of cash crunch that they couldn't sort of see their way out of. But they had numbers of options in terms of financing the business, and it was perfectly reasonable and proper for them with credible finance options on the table that would enable them to get through their cash position, to continue to trade while those options were realistic and while they were negotiating them. Yes, they were trading while insolvent, but it was a perfectly reasonable judgment that they'd be able to get the finance in place and trade through, which they've done, I'm delighted to say. So yeah, I think it's monitor your cash, take advice if you can see a crunch, but as I say, don't worry about this idea of trading while insolvent. It's, can you trade through? That's the question.
Brilliant, great advice, Jonathan. And look, on this today's session, as I mentioned earlier, we've only got 40 minutes. We've got a whole, we could probably sit here all day and spend 40 minutes on each individual point. But what we're going to do is we're going to race through sort of lots of areas of where business resilience really plays a part. And what I want to encourage again is, I can see a few questions popping in, but if you've got a question and want us to revisit a particular topic, I'll be bringing some of those in at the end. And I guess I'm asking really now from your experience and what you've seen, sort of anonymously with clients and businesses that you work with, but what do you think the worst thing that businesses could do during a crisis, like the COVID pandemic or whatever crisis might, future crisis?
Worst thing, I know, to quote Corporal Jones from Dad's Army, panic, I suppose. And it was hard not to, wasn't it? It was hard not to panic at the start of the pandemic. I suppose numbers of us thought we were staring down the barrel of a gun in terms of what was going to happen to our business. So it's easy to say and hard to do, I know, but don't panic, don't overreact, and don't take decisions with sort of long-term implications in response to what might be a short-term issue. So I've heard numbers of stories, and they may be apocryphal to a degree, of course, but about businesses, some of them very, very large listed businesses, where when the pandemic initially hit, staff started to work remotely. Everyone said it was great. They all wanted to now work remotely permanently. That was splendid. The business sort of canned much of its office space as a result. And basically, fantastic, everyone's going to be working from home. And when sort of the third lockdown hit, they discovered actually people were getting fed up of working from home all the time, and they wanted to come back into the office a bit. And at that point, they'd sort of they'd abandoned much of their office space. So to say that's perhaps a bit apocryphal, and certainly a gross oversimplification, I'm sure. But it's a sort of an example of a sort of quite a sort of a long-term decision, which is probably a bit of an overreaction to the short-term, what might have been a short-term issue. So hold your nerve, I suppose, is the key thing. But I do, I'm very conscious that these things are easy to say, aren't they, Fran? And we all know they're hard to do, and it's hard to know what's what at the time, what's holding your nerve and what's being pig-headed.
Yeah,
we don't know.
We've had a couple of questions popped in, and it goes right back to, I think, at the beginning when we asked what did we ask? The three. It was where we talked about the 3 Ps, and the second P that we talked about being people. So that's where we're seeing some questions come in right now. So we've got Simon Chowdhury asks, do you think productivity has increased with more flexibility in where and how we work as a result of COVID?
I'm not sure it has. I suspect that's a contentious view. I'm sure there'll be different opinions. I'm not sure it has. I was having this discussion with some people the other day. And I suppose, as ever, I sort of base that sort of partly on myself. So I know there's a view that productivity has increased because of the absence of commuting time, and for example, people using commuting time and starting work earlier and working longer hours. I'm just, if I'm honest, and again, I'm talking about myself, I'm skeptical that that's what we do. I think if we haven't got that commute, I think, and we're at home, I tend to sort of find myself occupying myself with other things, with domestic activities. I get distracted by things. I go down and collect the eggs from the chickens at the bottom of the garden. I take some washing out, and maybe that's my lack of self-discipline, and others may say, well, your lack of self-discipline, Jonathan, isn't a sort of a measure of what everybody's like. Many of us are much more disciplined than that, and I have to hold my hand up. So I'm not sure, actually. I think it is perhaps easier to be disciplined and efficient in work. I think that sort of separation of work and home is arguably more conducive to productivity and efficiency than flexibility. I think flexibility contributes to an inability to switch off. I don't think that necessarily contributes to people's well-being, and I don't think that in turn necessarily contributes to their productivity. But I'm conscious that I A, talk about myself, and B, talk from my own sort of personal situation, and different people I do appreciate have different personal contexts and may experience it very differently.
Thank you, Jonathan. We've got another question now that again is around people, and specifically around incentives for the workforce. Okay. In terms of I guess supporting people to be resilient, help a business to be resilient, involves very much looking after them and their interests. As employees, as incredibly important people to driving a business forward. So how necessary, I know this is something that Russell-Cooke sort of support with, how necessary are incentives to the workforce? Do you think businesses generally are offering enough? Maybe what's something brilliant that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, obviously incentives are sort of vital. I suppose the standard answer to that for many professional service businesses, lawyers, accountants alike, would be things like sort of EMI options, enterprise management incentives, share options for staff, in terms of incentivizing them to grow and contribute in the sort of growth in the sort of capital value of the business. And I think they're a useful tool, but I think they're sometimes overused. I've known people feel a bit fobbed off with EMI options. And I think we need to be conscious of, at the moment, there's a lot in the press, isn't there, about inflation, about growth in the cost of living. So I think sort of hard cash, bluntly, is going to be important to people. A lot of people may feel that bonuses, salaries are more. So jam today, his old-fashioned phrase, is more important than jam tomorrow. So I think sort of judicious balance of sort of future incentives but immediate reward is important. But then also, of course, if I'm right and we want people back in our offices, in our workplaces a bit, then we've got to focus very hard and think very hard about making them attractive places to be, making them places people want to come to, making them places that they enjoy being, that sort of contribute to their well-being. So that focusing that more, whereas I suspect historically we sort of focus quite narrowly on sort of money or sort of things like share options, but focusing on that, the softer stuff, the environment, what I've sometimes said recently, the sort of soft play areas in the office. I think that's going to be increasingly important.
Brilliant, thank you. I can see that there's Ravinder in the audience has got a hand up. Ravinder, if you could pop to the Q&A section and pop any question that you've got in there, that would be fantastic. We'll do our best to get it answered. There is another question that's come in here that's anonymous. That says, if a business has limited funds, what, in your opinion, is the most important thing that they should be spending money on to ensure resilience? And that's a bit of a tricky one to answer, but...
Yeah, that is tricky in terms of sort of spending money. I mean, I suppose it goes back to what I said before. I would say, what are your cash flow projections on a sort of reasonable basis? And if your ability to trade through your cash sort of hole, if that's the right phrase, is doubtful or on the cusp, then I would. And it's easy. I know professional advisors advising you to spend money on professional advisors. You're probably all very cynical about that, and I wouldn't blame you for that. But I think at that point, a little bit of spend on some specialist insolvency advice on whether you can trade through at that point, if that's what your cash flow projections are telling you, I think that is a legitimate and appropriate thing to do. So I would do that. Thanks,
Jonathan. And you know, again, this is a big question I've got, but I think sometimes we don't know the difficulties that we're going to face until we come across them ourselves. And I think that what we're trying to do with this community is really help people to learn through shared experiences and you know, potentially sort of mistakes and pitfalls that others have faced. So what would you consider to be some of the main difficulties that entrepreneurs and founders are going to experience when, you know, starting and growing their business? It's a big question.
Yeah.
Do you want me to circle back on it?
No. It's good. It's good. Energy, I suppose, is one thing. I think sort of sustaining and renewing your staff, your management team, your staff sort of source of energy, but particularly your own sort of energy. It's easy to sort of to throw yourself at it and run so hot and run so hard that you just then suddenly fall over. I suspect. I don't know how many people sort of recognise that description, and a lot of us can keep going on sort of empty or close to empty for a surprisingly long period of time. But I suppose, yeah, I would say that's one thing. Sort of your personal store of energy and drive, and your ability to convey that conviction to those you're working with and those that you're working for, to sort of different groups. So I think sort of planning. And perhaps that comes back to your own sort of well-being, really, I suppose, as a business owner, sort of planning structures and systems and a life that doesn't end up on you just sort of, as I say, sort of running on empty and falling over, and restores your energy, your wells of energy in various ways. That might, I mean, for a lot of people, that would be physical exercise, and physical exercise obviously got a part to play in it, but it isn't just about that, is it? It's about relationships and all sorts of other things that we derive our satisfaction from, as we were talking about that earlier. So I suppose that in a funny way is actually a key thing, energy, and sort of planning for sort of sustaining and replenishing your energy, because what was that phrase that there was an American politician years ago? Stuff happens. We all know that, doesn't it? Stuff happens. There will be unpredictable events externally, like pandemics, and there'll be customer issues, supplier issues, staffing issues, premises issues that will sort of hit us left field when we're least expecting it, just when we thought it was all plain sailing. So having a sort of a reserve, a store of energy that you're sort of consciously trying to replenish, I think, is what will leave you perhaps best place to sort of to deal with those left field things. Yeah. Don't know if that's the answer you're expecting, Fran.
Oh, no, it's your answer. We've had another question in here. It's again, this is an anonymous one. I think Ravinda raised a hand by accident, which is easy to do. Done it plenty of times.
Sorry, Ravinda.
I'm just going to read this one out. How do you stay resilient when there are huge liquidity in business? Does it make sense to keep investing in the business?
I'm not sure I can really answer that. Does it make sense to keep investing? It comes back to that sort of insolvency question, really, doesn't it? Are you throwing good money after bad? I would have thought you have to take that insolvency advice, really, in terms of the long-term viability of the business, its ability to trade through, and even if it's given a cash infusion, is that just a sort of temporary infusion, and is it still hemorrhaging at the other end? That's a horrible analogy, but is it still sort of hemorrhaging money at the other end faster than you can sort of put it in, and do you need to draw a line? It's harder to give you a better answer than that, I'm afraid, without knowing more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously we don't know who that attendee is. So if you'd like us to connect you with someone who can give some sort of further advice and explore whether what information you might need, then please do get in touch, and we'll do our best to join up the dots there.
Yeah, I mean, it would be someone probably in with Russell-Cooke. It would be someone our insolvency team to sort of talk to you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jonathan. Well, look, the time is completely running away with me. So we always ask at the end of these sessions, what are the 3 key points you think you would like the audience to take away from today's session?
I think, I knew you were going to ask me that, so I have thought about that one. So I think it goes back to my 3 Ps, really. That the planning, the people, and the sort of pivoting or the pragmatism. Plan with options, but don't be too wedded to a sort of narrow and particular plan. People are absolutely vital to it, so sort of nurturing them, providing opportunity for them, providing incentives for them is key. And then just that willingness to be pragmatic, willingness to pivot when you have to, often when you least want to or you least expect to. But 3 Ps.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Pleasure to be working with you and Russell-Cooke. And
you, Fran. Thank you.
Over to you, Chloe.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. And Jonathan, for sharing your expertise and knowledge with us today. It's been great to have you with us. We'll be back at the same time next week with co-founder of Jack Wills and director of Becco, Robert Shaw, as he discusses finding your best sellers and how to make the most of them. If there is anything you'd like to catch up on from today's session, there'll be a recording that will be available later on today. If you have registered for the session, you'll receive this via email. I've also included Jonathan's LinkedIn in the comment section, so if you wish to carry on the conversation or have any questions, you can do so there. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you again, Jonathan and Francesca.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.